Hello, everyone. You know, if you've seen this before, this is where you need to tell me in the chat that you can actually see me. I've only done about 4 of these before. So every time I hit go live, I'm like, it's not going to work this time. I'm going to spend 20 minutes talking to myself. And I need to silence my phone here. So I can see myself on my phone. So I think everyone can see me. So good morning, good afternoon, happy late New Year to everyone. We have absolutely struggled with schools being open here. We finally got snow. Let me show you. Ta-da! So this is my backyard. I live in Michigan. And we had absolutely no snow, and then it all happened. Probably 50 centimeters over 3 days. So it's beautiful. It's awesome here. Schools are not at all opening, though, which is a total bummer. But we got it covered today. We have somebody watching my son, so I can hang out, live stream, get some work done. So that kind of transitions into what I want to talk about today, which is LiveComponents and getting it to stable. My goal was to get LiveComponents to stable by the end of the year. That didn't quite happen with the conference and live tutorial stuff. So like that's what we need to get to. And actually first, who out there, did you guys watch the last stack tutorial? Like, what did you think? Are you using that stuff? I would love feedback. Like, I'm really excited about everything that we did in last stack. So I want to see, like, how are you all using it in the real world, and how did that go for all of you? It was probably like one of the most interesting tutorials for me to create. It also kind of showed me that I was underutilizing Turbo. I think for me, Turbo Frames was, before that tutorial, Turbo Frames was kind of like this cool thing you could use to like Ajax load some content, but you know, afterwards, if you've seen it, you know, being able to load it in modals or like side drawers, it's like so much more stuff than I thought before. Yeah, Paula says, not using it since I tend to do backend. Paul, I love that you always say that you tend to do backend, yet you keep showing up to these live streams about the front end. So that's awesome. Trying to encourage my front end colleagues to watch. Sweet. Watch the tutorial, although I knew quite a bit from the docs, picked up a few new tricks. Awesome. Well, that's impressive. I feel like I learned a lot making that tutorial. Marcus, testing was one of the most interesting parts because this is a part which needs more coverage, in my opinion. Yeah, and if you watch the testing part of it, it was a struggle. So we tested 2 things. We had one chapter kind of on testing Twig and LiveComponents in isolation, which is really cool. So you can have your tiny Twig component and integration test it, or render just that Twig component and do functional testing on it. But then we also did true functional tests, and that was an absolute struggle. So that's something that we need to improve inside of Symphony. Like we used, I'll put some notes up here in case I'm not being clear. Right, we used ZenStruct Browser, which I absolutely love. We integrated that with Panther, but there was just 10 different details that we had to set up to get everything working correctly, and it was a total pain in the butt. And Kevin Bond afterwards, who makes ZenStruct, he watched that and he had the same thought. He's like, we have to improve these things. So that's on my radar. It's not something I'm like working on right now, but I think over the next couple months, we have to make that testing experience better overall. Let's see here. Giuseppe, watched the tutorial and started using LiveComponents in production. Well, good. Then we should get them to stable, right? Using LiveComponents pretty much nonstop rather than JavaScript, which I dislike quite a bit. Awesome. And yeah, Paul, company of 2, so I always fear the front end might end up in my lap at some point. So I see, watching out for that. And you know, those small teams especially are like, we are a team of like 4-ish, 5-ish developers, depending on how you count them. So that's one of the things that I like also about the returning HTML from your app and sprinkling on the JavaScript, because you can, unlike building a front end in React and having a back end in API, you can have a single developer that can understand your entire stack, right? You can understand the back end, you can understand the front end. Like Paul is here, he might not work on the front end, but he understands the front end now. It's not such a black box where it's a totally different tool set. So that's one of the things I like about that philosophy. And Thomas, hello from Denmark. Hello from Michigan. I didn't watch any of the earlier ones, but I love the Symphony X videos, so thought I wanted to see what's going on here. Cool. Well, welcome to the live stream. We're still kind of figuring these out. It's something I want to keep doing every week. If you want to see certain topics, let me know. But my time is kind of short, so I've sort of been using these live streams to do and try stuff that I need to do and try anyway. So live components is something we need to get to stable. So it's like, let's spend an hour and see how close we can get it. So first, what does stable mean? Live components has existed for 2 years now, and it's still considered experimental. And basically what it comes down to is, I'm just going to make some notes here, is BC breaks. So live components is stable. It's not, of course, like I'm sure it has like some bugs, but there's not any major bugs or missing features or things that's wrong with it. And it's been that way for a while. When it comes down to releasing a stable release, it's, from a maintainer standpoint, it means that it limits us. And that's a healthy thing, but it means that like right now I can just break things if I want to. And I'm going to try not to do that because people are using it in their projects. But technically, if we do something on live components now and it breaks your app, I can kind of shrug my shoulders and say, well, I told you it was experimental, so not my problem. Of course, I don't want to be a jerk. That sounds meaner than it is, but that's a really nice defense when you're maintaining things, because we can make big changes and it's not going to break things. So really it came down to like, what are the things that might break backwards compatibility and that we want to do now versus waiting for later. And there's really just down to 3 things at this point. So the first one is Idiomorph. And how many people, this is hard to ask on a delayed thing here. How many people, you can just give me like a yes, but how many people are familiar with the morphing system or the idea of morphing, or who has no idea what I'm talking about at all? Yeah, and Morton, you said, I feel the syntax sugar of testing could be as expressible as that of Livewire. Livewire is definitely something we base all of live components off of, and the testing tools, which were built by Kevin, he modeled those off of Twig and live components. So probably we have more work to do to make it even smoother. And I think that's a lot of what we can do this year, is to make the experience of using live components smoother and better. One of the things that I would like to have is for lack of a better word, a live components profiler. So almost think of like web debug toolbar or browser debugging tools for live components. I think this is a really important thing that we should do over the next couple months. So something where you can actually see on your page what live components you have on your page, what state each of them has, what their props are, and how those props have changed over time, and even the ability to change those props. So if you've used like Vue developer tools, they have things like this where you can actually look at a component on your page, and you can actually look at the state of that component, change the state of the component. And I think if we had something like that for live components, it would help a lot. I feel when people are having problems with live components, it's a bit of a black box. So I think that's a problem. People kind of say, well, it's magic. And so when it doesn't work, I don't really understand what's going on. So if we have, we need to open that up. We need to really reveal what's going on inside. And I think a live component profiler or debug tool would go a long way to doing that. Cool, awesome. So I have some no ideas on morphing. So this is perfect. So this idea of morphing is something that live components does, but it is an increasingly important strategy for many front-end tools that use the philosophy we're using. So back up here, the philosophy that we are using, the 2 philosophies of the web here, are return HTML, then add JavaScript. So this is sometimes called HTML over the wire. It has other names. Or the other philosophy, general philosophy of the internet, right, is build your HTML with JavaScript. So this is your React, Vue, that kind of stuff. And I'm not going to try to tell you one is better than the other one. I'll tell you that I like the first one better, but they're both valid ways of doing things. But with this first philosophy, this idea of morphing is becoming more important. morphing. So when you make an AJAX call and you get HTML back, so let's see here. Actually, do I have a let me just get some website open so I can actually see it. Perfect. So over here, I'm actually using Turbo Frames. This is from LastStack. And when I click this, it makes an AJAX request to get the Turbo Frame from a different page. And then it takes that Turbo Frame and it replaces this area. So it's the way that you expect AJAX to work. I make an AJAX call. It returns HTML. I take that entire bit of HTML and I put it somewhere on the page. It gets put right here. So what morphing does is instead of completely replacing the old HTML, it takes the new HTML from the server, so this HTML right here, and it looks at the old HTML and it basically performs a diff. So it takes the old HTML or the existing HTML here, it figures out what's changed on the new HTML, and then it modifies the existing HTML to look like it. Now this is not a really good example because these are kind of two different pages, let's see. Well, I guess LiveComponents is kind of a good example. Where this becomes into play, the reason you would want to do this is sometimes replacing an entire area, the HTML of an entire area with a new one is not going to be the best user experience, and that can actually get a bit disruptive. So forms are one specific case. So this is the LiveComponents demo here, and as I type inside of here, the entire live component is reloading. So the live component is this light gray part here, and it includes this text box. So the tricky thing here is that if we use the normal model of replacing the HTML with the new HTML, it would actually replace the input, and it would clear out my input, and my input would be empty, and my input would probably also lose focus. So this is a simple example, but morphing is just a way to mutate your existing HTML, and in some cases, it can give you a better user experience. Another thing that morphing could be doing here is helping us with CSS animations. For example, if I were morphing and this autocomplete one were being removed, we could fade it out. That's harder to do when the new HTML is just replacing the old HTML. So anyways, that was probably too long of a explanation, but there are libraries to handle this morphing, and the one that seems to be gaining some traction lately is called Idiomorph. And the first BC break, to go all the way back here, was that in LiveComponents, we previously used a library called Morphdown, and so we wanted to switch that to Idiomorph. This is probably not something that you are going to notice at all because it's a low-level detail, but it's technically a backwards compatibility break because it could cause some slightly different behavior. So this is one of those things that we wanted to get done, and this is actually already finished. So I'm just mentioning this is one of the things we wanted to get done. This is merged. This is good. So I don't know. I'll give it a little yellow background there. The reason we switched to Idiomorph, people that watch LastStack probably know this, is that the next version of Turbo is going to enable morphing. What I mean is they're not going to morph by default, but they are going to allow you to do morphing, and Idiomorph is the library they're going to use under the hood, so we wanted to use the same library that Turbo is going to use in their next version. All right, the other two things that are really the blockers, there's not much, are post by default. So actually, let me pull up the pull request on this. This is something I fought for a long time. That's not the right thing. So we'll see if we can get some pull requests merged. If I can find this one, let's see here. Where are you? Aha, there we go. See, this is an old one. So right now, when you use LiveComponents, behind the scenes, it's making GET requests. So there's AJAX calls happening here. And the AJAX call has this really long URL on it here. So when I type in here, it makes an AJAX call. And you can see how long that URL is right there. Not actually a problem. If the URL gets long enough, so long that it's too big for, there's actually a limit on how long a URL can be, then LiveComponents automatically changes this to be a post request. but by default, it makes a GET request. And the reason I did that was that I thought maybe people would, if it's a GET request, maybe people would use HTTP caching to cache their components. And in reality, like, people aren't doing that. And I think it's tricky because you have all these query parameters on here anyway. If you know anything about HTTP caching, this is not really a great use case for it. And the other problem that we came up with was why using a GET request is not a good idea. Like, what ultimately convinced me is passwords. And we actually have this, I think, as one of our demos, if I remember correctly. Demos. Yep, right here. So this is a registration form. And right now it's GET only. It makes GET requests. So if I type into the password here and I click off of it, we didn't see it. Boop. That just made a GET request, and the plaintext password is actually stored inside of the GET URL, inside of the query parameters. Now, that's not technically a problem. Like, it's not like anybody can see this, but that can end up in your access logs, and we don't really want sensitive things in your access logs. So it's one of the things where it's if we keep using GET requests by default, it's going to let somebody accidentally make a security mistake, and we don't want that. So this is the pull request for that, and let's just roll through here and review this and see if we can get it merged. So we have a couple merge conflicts, which is fine. That's because I waited so long to merge this. All right, so I've merged I've already reviewed a bunch of things here. So inside of, by the way, so Symphony UX, if you don't know, is a single repository, but it holds lots and lots of different packages. So one of the packages it holds is LiveComponents. And inside of there, let's actually pull up LiveComponents over here in my editor. Source LiveComponents. So as far as the JavaScript for LiveComponents, it lives in this assets directory. All of our, at least right now, all of our source JavaScript files are done in TypeScript. And then we have a script that actually, compiles the TypeScript into one final JavaScript file. So these are all the TypeScript definition files, but this is the only real JavaScript file here, livecontroller.js. So anything here, when I see like the dist directory, it's not something I need to worry about because that's just a compiled file, so I can ignore that. Here's another dist file, I can ignore that. Cool. And yeah, all right, awesome. So I'm not going to look at this in too much detail with all of you watching, but let me see if I find anything interesting. I've already reviewed most of this stuff. So the big user-facing feature here is that the asLiveComponent attribute is now going to have a method on it. So you control get versus post, but it's going to default to post. So you can see that's what it's doing right here. This is the constructor of the asLiveComponent that you put above your class. String method equals post. Checking for get or post is the only two. So that's good. And then this is LiveComponent subscriber. So this is actually an event subscriber. This is getting a little bit deeper into LiveComponents, but if you're curious, when you make an AJAX call back to re-render, so whenever we type into, should have kept that open. Whenever a LiveComponent re-renders like this, it makes an AJAX callback, and this LiveComponent subscriber is actually what helps render that. It kind of sets things up and ultimately helps call your controller. There's an internal controller behind the scenes. But here it's grabbing the component name, it's grabbing the request method, and it's basically just checking to make sure that you're using the correct method. So we're not, if we have post only, we're not allowing for a GET request, so that's fine. And man, yeah, this is really interesting stuff. One of the other things that we need to do is communicate metadata from the back end to our front end. So if our front end needs to know, hey, should I make GET requests or should I make post requests? But that's something that we're configuring on our asLiveComponent attribute. So the way that we are passing that information from the back end to the front end is the same way that you do it inside of your stimulus stuff, which is just via a stimulus value. So if we actually look at livecontroller.js, not the dist file, the source file. There we go. So just like normal stimulus controllers, I love this. We just use static value. So live components behind the scenes is just at first a stimulus controller. And here's all the different information that we pass into the stimulus controller to get things set up. So there's a new one called request method. So we pass that from the back end to the front end, and that ultimately passes to where we make the HTTP request. So that looks fine. That's where we're passing that attribute. That's fine too. Good, good, good. A bunch of tests. Yay. I don't know if I'm the only open source maintainer, probably not, that reviews the tests, but very lightly. All right, cool. I think we're good to go. So let's merge this. I would normally review a little bit more, but I've reviewed that pull request before. So y'all can see a little bit of the tools we use to merge stuff. All right, so let me get back onto the 2.x branch. So this is pull request 1218. We don't actually merge things directly. Let's see here. The Symphony team has an internal merging tool. Fabian's talked about it before. It's nothing too fancy, but it allows us to merge pull requests in a very consistent way. And it also saves the entire conversation of the pull request. So all the comments that we have in the pull request to a special place inside the Git repository. So it's basically a little merge tool, but it has a few bells and whistles. So let's copy that. I'm going to call it with sgh merge 1218. Ooh. So you can see it checks the tests here, so I can, kind of yells at me if I'm trying to merge something and the tests are failing. And then it tells, I can ask me, I can squash those 28 commits. So I'm going to squash those. This is going to be a feature. This helps us generate change logs, things like that. And yeah. And then cool, this is actually one of the more complicated ones. So when it rebased, it actually hit a conflict, which we expected because we saw that down here that there was a couple conflicts. So the tool handles that. The tool does handle that, but holy moly, that was way more than I expected. Let's see here. Do I want to fix all those or not? Oh boy, what happened here? I feel like the user might have a merge inside their commits. I think that sometimes messes things up. Oh, there we go. Yeah, merge branch. I don't know why, but sometimes, yeah, when there's a merge branch inside of there, that makes the rebasing much messier. So, really want to get this merged, but I'm not going to do this right now. I might do this afterwards, or I might ask the user. So the purpose of us being able to fix those rebases quickly is to avoid the exact situation I'm in now, which is having to ask the user to do the rebasing, because we don't want to having that extra back and forth just delays things, because maybe the user's not going to get back for not going to be able to do it for another week. So I'm going to, let's see, how bad is this? It's going to be debating, because I really want to merge this. These look superficial. I'm going to see if we can do this real quick. Unreleased, that's fine. See, I don't know why that would be there. Need some Jeopardy music here. Change log on live components. There it is. That one makes sense. There we go. Post by default. That makes sense. I don't need to worry about the dist files. We're just going to reinitialize those in a second, which we can also see how that works, which is cool. And that's complicated enough that I don't want to do it. Never mind. I don't want to rush through this and actually make a mistake. Dang, okay. All right, so let me go over here and ask this user if they can do it. can all see how many mistakes I actually make typing. Can you rebase this, please? There we go. All right, perfect. Well, not perfect, but we'll live with that. Okay, so let's go back here and check our thing. So post by default, this is close. All right, so the last blocker, which I think might not even be a blocker, but I want to mention it, is the data action name syntax. So let me look at the docs for this. Cool. So this is maybe not that common. What's the data action name? But then, no, yeah, this is, yeah, okay. I was trying to remember what features this affects. So data action name is what is used when you call a live action, right? So you hit button here, and you activate a live action via these two things here, data action and data action name. Now, the reason that there are two lines here is kind of annoying, but also kind of cool, because we're trying to leverage stimulus as much as possible. So remember that LiveComponents is really just a stimulus controller. And that stimulus controller is called live. And so what you're doing here is you're just triggering the method called action on the live controller. So there's like, the way this hooks up is just really nice because it's just native stimulus. However, when we say that we want to trigger a live action, we also need to give it more information, right? We need to tell which live action we want to hit on our controller or on our component. And so we have this data action name equals. Now there's two problems with this data action name syntax. And the first one has to do with arguments. So let's see if I can find an example here. Here we go. Maybe some of you have run into this. So really cool thing is you can pass arguments to your live action. So I have ID equals, and that is going to correspond down here to the ID down here. Hey, get out of here. That's my time tracker. So the problem with this is the syntax is very dumb. And notice that there is no quotations around this. So we run into problems with people needing to have a comma, for example, inside their value, and we think the comma is separating the one argument, this first argument, from the second argument. So like if there was a comma right here in the string, then things would totally break. And there's other cases like this. Like the syntax is just not smart enough right now, so we need to have a smarter syntax for this. This is something that Simon is working on, so hopefully we'll have it soon. And I list it as a blocker, but I think I'm not going to make it a blocker because the second thing that's wrong with this syntax is actually the attribute. So when LiveComponents, well, let me back up here. The data action syntax, it's like forget about LiveComponents, just think about stimulus controllers. The data action attribute allows you to call a method on a stimulus controller. Great. But this attribute by itself doesn't give you a way to pass arguments to that method. So if we had, well, let's see here. Actually, let's just go right to the documentation on this. There we go. Reference action. There we go. Cool. So here's an example. All right, we're calling the next method on the gallery controller. So here's your next method right there. Great. So that's nice. But there isn't a built-in way with data action to pass arguments to that. And when LiveComponents came out, Stimulus did not have a way to pass arguments, period. Since then, Stimulus has added a new feature called params, and you actually can pass arguments to your controllers now, or to your action methods. So let's see, where is an example here? Here it is, perfect. So in this case, I kind of put two examples on top of one here, but let's look here. Data, item, payload, param, perfect. So we have a data action here called item upvote, and then we have the syntax here, which is data item ID param. So item is matching the controller name. Param is kind of a special thing to highlight it. And ID is the name of that parameter. So by having this data item ID param equals thing, down here, you can actually access that. So you're still past the event argument, but you can call event.params and you can get the ID, the URL, active, payload, that kind of stuff. So the point is there is now a mechanism to properly pass values into a stimulus controller, and there wasn't when LiveComponents first came out. So if we look at this syntax here, let's just play with this a little bit. Let's see. Let me open a Scratch. Cool, so this is what we have right now. So if we think about what we could do here, we could say data item, so data live dash, and then the name of a param here. So let's think here. Args dash param equals, there we go. And then we would have some sort of syntax in here, like you'll tell me what feels best here. I mean, it could be, we really could use something that's JSON-esque inside of here. So, but the point is, the first part of this is that even though it's a couple characters, 1, 2, 3, 4 characters longer than the old one, this syntax actually makes more sense because this is just native stimulus. So this would be us. If you imagine what the stimulus controller looks like for this, let's say we have a class controller. So this is my JavaScript down here, right in the middle of this file. So, all right, Copilot, you're fired. Go away. I'm doing too weird of things. I don't want you to guess what I'm doing. So export default class extends controller. So imagine this is our live controller that's deep in the core. If we have something that is called action right now, performs the live action AJAX request, then the fact that we have this data live action params means that up here we can now get, we can say const args equals event.params.args. So it's a kind of a proper way to pass that value into our stimulus controller. But then we still need a way to communicate multiple arguments, so we're still going to need some sort of a syntax here. I don't know. What do you all think? Like, what would be a good syntax to have here? You know, this is what troubles me here is I always want to have things that are normal. I don't want to create things that are special to live components. I don't want special live component syntaxes. This is precisely why I think we should change from this, which is totally invented by live components, to this, which is a standard stimulus thing. So the same thing goes for the value. Like, what's a standard value that we should use? And maybe it is, I mean, if you want to get crazy, you could write JavaScript. Yeah, data live item name param equals custom item. That's an interesting idea. I don't know if that would work or not. So Alistair is saying data live. I think the problem, I think one of the problems with that is that if you're going to put, so this is not quite right, but this is basically, oh, sorry, not item name. There we go. And then custom item. That's really interesting because it removes all of the parsing problems, which I'm a big fan of. The problem is this part here. You can't have capital letters in argument names, and they solve that. I guess they solve that, though. Let's see here. Do they have an example? I believe it converts into a dash case. But where? Do they really not have an example of that? They don't, so I would actually need to play with that. The Following format of data-identifier-param-name. Parameters must be specified in the same element as the action. Yes, yes, yes. So I'll have to play with that, but my impression was that it would end up needing to be like this. In fact, let's play with that right now. Let's just see. Let's see what happens if we mess around with some stuff. So let me think here. We just need a normal stimulus controller. So I'm going to load up. Let's load up the uxSymphony site. That's in the targets documentation. Yeah, that might be what I'm thinking of, Robert. It still might be that we need to use the dash case in this point, but that might be why I was expecting that documentation to be there, even though I don't see it. It's a relatively new feature, so it might just be missing the documentation on that spot. All right, so let's open up. And then Symfony open local. I think I already have a web server. No, I don't. I restarted my computer a few days ago. Good for me. And the 30 days, there was another instance of that conversion. Yeah, there probably was. I try to avoid those things, but if it's a stimulus thing, at least then we can point to stimulus and be standard around stimulus. You know, it's not like a live in live components we like change your casing. But like, no, that's just how params work inside of stimulus. All right, so let's mess around here with a controller. Let's see what controllers we have. We have a, let's see, Markdown Controller. Here's a good one. This actually is what powers our little converter down here. So that's an easy one to play with. So we have render. Let's console.log event, because that's where the params are going to show up. And this is going to be homepage.html.twig. Let's look for Markdown. Cool. There we go. And there's my stimulus controller. As some of you probably know, I'm using these stimulus helpers less and less. So I'm going to change this to data controller equals Markdown. And then it would be data dash Markdown dash, let's just start simple here. Foo dash param equals bar, right? So that should be the name of it. And let's open up our console tools. And everything breaks. Whoops, what did I do wrong here? Do I have things in a broken state? Or hold on a second. That's a weird enough thing where I wonder if I'm just doing something funny. My local UX site I abuse. I do lots of funny things with it. That is a weird error though. Let's look down here. So the nested error times must be greater than equal. That isn't a string repeat. Twig component extension. Whoa. So this is coming from deep inside of Twig, which is why I think it's something unrelated and something funny I did. Oh, no, I caused it. What did I do? How did I cause that with that? Somebody tell me if they spot it. But I do not see it. Okay, interesting. No, it doesn't like that. Weird. Yeah, I'm thinking of the cache of Symfony too, but because it's a weird enough thing. But at this point, I've modified the files enough times. I also ran cache clear. But let's clear it out just to be sure. What's weird is stashing it gets rid of the change, but the changes look very boring. Yeah, uxSymphony.com. That all looks fine. All right, let's get rid of. So now we're debugging down something else. It doesn't like this block markdown for some reason. Doesn't like it once I mess with it. What kind of problem do you have? Oh, that was weird. See that? Okay, that is super weird. Almost makes me think I have some invalid white space character or something. Okay, well. No, because I... Okay, I am going to ignore that for the moment. That was really weird. That was coming deep from like Twig's compiled code. It's probably one of the weirdest things I've ever seen Twig do. So anyway, back to our experiment here. All right, so when I hit convert here, it's going to hit our action. There's our params. I have nothing in my params because I probably messed up the syntax because params are new to me. Let's see here. Data item. Data markdown. Oh, my bad, of course. This needs to go where our action is. These are action params, not controller params. So let's do data action equals markdown render. There we go. That's where we need that. Here, pointer event, params, foo bar. Cool. So that's the basic use case. So let's get a little bit more complicated then. And change this to foo bar equals baz. So I'm kind of guessing that it's this dash case that's going to convert into the lower camel case. And yep, there it is right there. So that's our answer, foo bar. So I'm basically like, I'm guessing if you do something like this, well, let's see. I don't have to guess. Let's just experiment here. Yep, that's the problem. So there's no attributes can't be capital, or a better way to say it is attributes are case insensitive. So your browser takes all of your attributes and just makes them all lowercase. So by the time it gets into JavaScript, it can't tell that we wrote it as foo capital B bar. It looks like foo little b bar. So when it gets over here, our value ends up being foo little b bar, which is why we need to have foo dash bar param. So that all goes back to, what do we like better here? So do we want, here are the kind of two proposals. Data live item, oh, that's not, let's see, ID dash param equals curly curly item.id. So remember, this is kind of our current syntax. So current syntax. Proposal 1. And this exact syntax of this proposal is up for debate. But the point is we have some syntax here that is parsed by LiveComponents. And then proposal 2 is we just go straight stimulus. And then, you know, ultimately what we're sending back to the server is always going to be, well, that's actually not true. No, scratch that. But ultimately, like, these are just going to be simple values then. So if you can put it inside of a quotes, then it works. So I don't know. What do you guys think? I mean, this is kind of the fancier version. So let me actually complete this so it's but that requires an entire parser to do that. which I don't love. You know, I think there's some value also to having things recognizable as just stimulus. If you know stimulus, you can understand what's going on here. I don't know. Isn't there an example about objects 2 on TurboDocs? I don't know. Yeah, you're right. With option 1, you have to think about like escaping quotes. So yeah, if you have, there we go. Like, that's not right. Yep, custom items. So I think we should go with proposal 2 also, and I think that was a really good idea. I think Alistair, you suggested that. It just fixes the problem. It just doesn't look as good. But I'm not, so there's the marketing side of me, but I'm not sure that we should really care. I mean, I really feel good about embracing raw stimulus features. And Simon was working on a proposal for this, and it was quite a bit of code to get this working, which just, it doesn't have a good feel. Oh, cool. Yeah. And you say, I like that. Plus 1 for proposal 2, mainly for being recognizable. Yeah, like it is cool. Like that param is a recognizable thing. Well, awesome. If that's the most, that is more than I hope to get out of this live stream today, because I hadn't actually sat down and hacked this stuff out yet. So this solution down here hadn't even occurred to me. I was thinking 100% we've got to do some sort of a parser, but maybe we can make it an easy parser or something, or maybe we make it like JSON or something so we can just JSON parse it. Cool, Darren, and the fact that you haven't worked with these tools yet, but proposal 2 still seems better to you. One of the tricky things is that we base ourselves off of Livewire. And Livewire is fantastic. So basing yourself off Livewire is a great thing to do. Like, that's why LiveComponents exists. Livewire has entirely custom syntaxes, and I don't know if that's right or wrong, but that is the reasoning behind sometimes why we have these shorter syntaxes, even though maybe we shouldn't. So let's see here. Where is it? Example here. Where is it? I thought this was the right page. Event listeners. Maybe I'm in the wrong spot. But anyways, Livewire has like a really short syntax for these, and yeah, maybe we don't really need to have that short of a syntax. But that's kind of the reason why that came originally. So yeah, I think we'll do live 2. So to kind of circle us back, because we're getting close to, I'm trying to keep these down to like 1 hour, so you all don't have to listen to me for too long. So this is done. This is just going to require a rebase, and this wasn't technically a blocker, but I think now we can get it done by using the param syntax for each specific param. Cool. And then I think we're good. And LiveComponents stable release is going to be version like 2.14. It's kind of like underwhelming in a lot of ways, because like as you can see, there's not like a big hidden feature. It's just about setting a point in time where we say we're not going to make backwards compatibility breaks, from here. All right. So on that note, if anybody has any questions about LiveComponents stable, anything, you can let me know in the chat. But I have 10 minutes left, so if you guys want to hang out for 10 minutes, I'm just going to go through and do some triaging of pull requests and see what other stuff we can get installed or get merged. So actually, this is a new feature for the next version of LiveComponents. It's not released yet. It's called URL binding. You may have heard me talk about it. So this is just the documentation for it, which should be ready to merge. So the idea here is that you can have a live prop. like query. And by adding URL true above it, when that live prop changes, it's going to automatically change the query string. So here you can see you have a question mark query equals. So this is going to allow you to actually kind of maintain state. So when your user refreshes the page, the query parameters will be in the page, so your live component will restart itself in the exact same state as it did before. So this is the documentation on that. So let's just give this a quick read here. Query param and the URL will be updated to reflect the new state. Yep. As I said, I've already reviewed a bunch of this. Let's see. Someone may have suggested I say remove it. I think this is self-evident. I say, well, let's remove it entirely. So this might not quite be ready yet. So supported data types. So obviously you can use a simple query string, but the way this feature is created is really robust. You can use other things as well. So you can use, of course, strings or numbers, but you can also set this to a live prop that's an array or a live prop that's an object. So let's see here. So I was saying he says objects, but down here he doesn't really show an object. So that was the purpose of the last example. Those values are the serialized ones. Maybe I should change the table header to something like JavaScript prop values. I think that's fine, yeah. So what he's saying here, he's like, if you have, it's a little confusing, but if you have a live prop that were set to an object, and that object was dehydrated into JSON that looked like this, this is what would happen on the query parameter. I think it's not that important enough of a thing, so I'm going to let that go. When a page is loaded with a query parameter that's bound to a live prop, the value goes through the hydration system before it's set onto that property. If a value can't be hydrated, it will be ignored. Okay, multiple query parameters, it's fine. Validating them. Like any writable live prop, because the user can modify the value, you should consider adding validation. When you bind a live prop to the URL, the initial value is not automatically validated. So what we're talking about here is, you know, if you're using this feature and the user's typing into a box, they're going to end up with something like this in the URL. One of the parts of this feature is that if you refresh this page, when your component is created, LiveComponents is going to automatically take this query and the value foo, and it's going to mount your object with that value. So this query here is going to automatically, on the next page load, have that foo inside of it. So this means that the user can change this however they want. So it's just something you need to be aware of. Like, this is a user-facing value, so they're going to be able to change this however they want. There's no protection on them changing this. So there's a little block here that shows you what you could do if that was like somewhat sensitive and you needed to do some validation. All right, I'm actually going to merge this. There's one extra warning here, but I'm cool with it. So let's see if we can get that merging system to actually work. SGH merge 1346. Cool. Squash those. This is minor. Documentation is always minor. Feature and bug are basically the big thing, and those determine whether the next release will be a minor release or a patch release. So any documentation, things like that are minor. Awesome. That is one of my favorite features that's coming up. All right, let's see what else. That's for me. I can skip that. That's a bigger thing. This is an interesting thing to look at if you want to. The idea of progressive web apps has been around for a while. It's becoming more of a thing, I think, right now. And so there's actually a pull request here showing how ux.symphony.com itself can be transformed into a progressive web app. And this is something we will probably merge at some point so we can be a good example of how to do that. All right. Oh, this is by me. I know that guy. Okay, cool. documentation. Let's merge that real quick, and then let's move on to something more interesting. Oh, this is another, let's review that. That's another boring one. Skip that, skip that. Here we go, here's a fix. This is more interesting. Ooh, got a PWA coming up. The progressive web apps are something that I'm also only really getting to know right now. I'm definitely not an expert on it, but there's a lot more conversation going around progressive web apps. In part, if you follow the people behind Basecamp and Hey.com, they're leaning hard into progressive web apps, and part of the reason is they're trying to get around the App Store and be able to have installable things or things that look native on your device without having to go through the App Store and the App Store's approval process and then give them 30% of your profits, that whole mess. So it's kind of a great moment. Like, progressive web apps are an internet technology, so it's kind of a great moment to say, no, like there's a better way. We can create these experiences, these mobile experiences that feel native or nearly native, and it's just web technology, and it's not going through some app store that's gated by Apple or somebody else. So it's a really, really cool thing. All right, so we're fixing a bug here. Let's see. Add collection item doesn't work when using DTO as a source. This is live component. And let's look here. When using the live collection type with a DTO as a data object, you now encounter the following error during the add collection item live action. So the live prop invoice records is an array. We determine the array is full of these model objects, but at least one key had a different value of null. This occurs because the new item is still null according to the prop metadata, and object is expected. So this has to do with LiveComponents' hydration system. It's a little bit more complex. But when you put a live prop above a property, we need to dehydrate that. That's the word we use. Basically take whatever this value is and convert it into a format that can be sent to the front end. So basically we need to convert it to JSON so we can send that to the front end. And then when we make AJAX calls, we take that JSON and we make an AJAX call and we send that back to the back end. And then that same value is hydrated back into this property. So this financials model thing basically needs to be turned into JSON, and then later from JSON back into a financials models object. So cool. And there are various rules about how that works and how that's done. That hydration system is recursive. So for example, here when the financials model is dehydrated to JSON, we also try to dehydrate the individual properties on financials model. So when I look at the error here, the error is actually having a problem dehydrating or hydrating this property right here. Notice like this is a little bit tricky. So the hydration system is entirely based off of the types you use on your property. So one of the decisions that we made for LiveComponents was that we don't expose your technical class information to the front end. So if you think about it, like a really easy way to serialize this to JSON would be to, a shortcut we could take is we could take this financials object, we could serialize it to JSON, and we could also include the full class name that this data belongs to. And then when we hydrate it, we could then read that full class name and know what object we're hydrating into. So if we did that, you wouldn't need to have this type hint here because we would be packaging the information about what type of object this is right with the data. When we made LiveComponents, we chose not to do that. That's actually what Livewire does. And we said, no, I don't want to expose our PHP class names to the front end. So instead, what you have to do is you have to properly type your code. So because you properly type this, all we need to do is send the data for this object to the front end, because when we hydrate it later on an AJAX call, we can just read this right here and say, yeah, this JSON here, this JSON is for this property, and we can see right here that this property's type is a financials model. So this gets a little bit trickier though when you have an array. And when you have an array, what you need to do is, and he actually does not show it here. When you have an array, you actually need to add a little bit of documentation above it, like PHP doc, that says what it's an array of. So if I had this, you need to do this type of thing, @var invoice record, like that. So then same thing, we are able to use that metadata. It's an array of items, so we can see it's an array of items, so we can loop over it, and then we can hydrate them. So that's kind of the background behind what's going on. To make things more complicated, this is attached to a form. Let's skip past there. All right, I'm actually going to skip over. There's a lot of details here, which is great. So let's go over and look at his fix. All right, so, okay, live component hydrator. Okay, so fix initialization object item when new is added. Okay. Oh boy, this is a complicated one. So some of the most complicated ones are these one-liners here. So what's happening here is this is deep inside of a class called LiveComponentHydrator. This is probably like the most complex part of LiveComponents. This is taking care of that hydration and that dehydration. And can I open this entirely? There we go. And we are all the way down here, and we are inside the dehydrate value method. So this is when we are going from our object in PHP, from our value in PHP, like our object, into JSON. And down here, you can see this is where we're handling if it's an array. So if it's an array, we then look at the metadata of that property. So for each property on for each live prop, we collect a bunch of metadata about it, like what is its, like, is it nullable? What is its type? You know, we kind of read this information off of it. And so that's what we're doing here. We're reading the metadata off there. And this collection value type, this is actually us asking what is the type of each item in the collection. So this will be set if you have properly done this. So in this case, the collection value type would be this invoice record. And that would tell us, oh, this is an array of invoice record objects. So if there is a collection value type and the collection value type is an object, so it's not an array of strings, it's an array of objects, now we know we're going to dehydrate this into that type. So we get the collection class, we loop over them, and let's see, oh, that's his fix right there. This is the new code right there. And basically what we do is we just dehydrate each one one by one. So it's a pretty simple operation. In fact, the only reason at all that we are looking to see what the collection type is here is so we can throw this exception right there. We want to make sure that you haven't documented that you have an array of products, and then inside that array we find something else. So we grab what your type of your collection is here, we loop over them, and then we check to see if each item in there actually is one of those types, and then we dehydrate it right there. So this is the fix right here. I can already tell this is not going to be the right fix. He's basically saying, hey, if one of the items inside there is null, then let's just instantiate a new instance of that. So I'm thinking what the proper fix here is either two things. One, either we should not allow this. Like we should say, look, no, you need to actually, if you say something is an array of invoice record objects, then it needs to be an array of invoice record objects. You can't have a null value in there. Or we can maybe allow a null value. Like I think, I've never done that before. That looks weird to me, but I think you can say an array of invoice record objects or null. And in that case, we can just be okay with it. We can say, okay, when we serialize this to JSON, one of the keys is going to be null. And when we hydrate this later back into that array, when we see the null, we're just going to allow that item to be null. So I'm actually going to say that here. Let's actually go back. and look at his original issue. Might need to look at this further too to see if what he is doing is legitimate or not, but for now. Having a DTO or entity with the constructor is already not allowed in this package. Well, that's true of doctrine entities, but not of DTOs. Ah, that's what Norkuna said. Okay, so I would say this. I agree. Let's say I think we can have a different solution. If your array is truly an array of DTO objects or null values, then during dehydration, when we see a null value, we can keep that value as null. Then during hydration, we see the null value in the collection. Once again, we keep it as null. And then also, this means that you get back the exact same array after dehydration and hydration as you had originally. So with this pull request, during dehydration, he's converting null to an object, which is a little weird because it means when you rehydrate it later, you're not going to have the event, you're not going to have the same value you originally had. That null is actually now going to be an object. All right, so let's actually try that. Wow, that was a very technical one. Anyway, I'm going to let everyone go. I'm going to go up and kind of keep reviewing some more of these types of things. So, but yeah, that's it. This was like a little more technical than some of my other live streams. So like, I don't know if that was cool or not cool to see some of the internal ways that LiveComponents is actually working behind the hood. But I'm really excited to get this thing stable really soon. If you have ideas, feedback, missing features, let me know. I mean, that's part of the reason I do these live streams is, I mean, this was great. Like like Alistair's idea of how to do the params was awesome. So to get feedback from you and hear about like real problems or things that you're actually hitting using these tools. So the tools like look really good, but I want them to work really well in real projects. So let's make sure that actually happens. All right. I'll say goodbye to everybody. I'll probably hang out on the chat for a second in case anybody has any questions, but you can always find me in Slack as well. And I can't remember I'm live streaming next week. I already forgot what I'm doing. So if there's anything you want me to live stream on, let me know. But I already have something scheduled, or will have it scheduled soon for next week. So thank you for joining me in my snowy wonderland, and I'll see everybody next week. Once I figure out where the end stream button is. There it is.